Before most Americans had electricity, one family controlled the explosive that built railroads, won wars, and reshaped the continent. The DuPonts didn't just sell gunpowder. They became the gunpowder, holding a monopoly so complete that the U.S. government couldn't function without them. By the time anyone noticed, they'd already pivoted into chemicals, nylon, and a fortune that would define American industry for 2 centuries. This is the story of how a French immigrant with a chemistry background turned black powder into dynastic wealth that still echoes today. 1800. Napoleon's Europe is collapsing. A young French aristocrat named Eleuthère Irénée DuPont watches his family's printing business crumble under revolutionary chaos. His father, a political economist, had connections but no safety. So they fled. Destination: the young United States, a country barely holding itself together, perpetually short on everything, especially quality gunpowder. Here's what most people miss about early America: it wasn't just expanding, it was exploding outward. Settlers needed powder for hunting, for clearing land, for protection. The military needed it constantly, but American powder was garbage, inconsistent and dangerous, often injuring the people using it. DuPont saw the gap immediately. He'd trained under Antoine Lavoisier, the father of modern chemistry, before Lavoisier lost his head to the guillotine. That education was priceless. DuPont understood powder production at a molecular level, while American manufacturers were basically guessing. In 1802, he opened a mill on the Brandywine River in Delaware. Location wasn't accidental. The river provided power. Nearby Wilmington offered access to Philadelphia's markets, and Delaware's laws were friendly to business incorporation. The early years were brutal. Explosions were common in powder mills. Workers died regularly. DuPont himself nearly got killed multiple times. But he had something competitors lacked: scientific precision. He controlled every variable: sulfur purity, charcoal density, grinding time. His powder was stronger, cleaner, more reliable. Word spread fast. Then came 1812. America went to war with Britain again, and suddenly the government needed powder in massive quantities. DuPont delivered. His mills worked around the clock. Profits exploded along with the production. By the war's end, DuPont wasn't just a supplier. He was the supplier, the only manufacturer the military fully trusted. But here's where it gets interesting. Most entrepreneurs would have relaxed after that success, enjoyed the money, maybe diversified into something safer. The DuPonts did the opposite. They doubled down, expanded aggressively, and started buying competitors. Not hostile takeovers usually. They'd simply wait for a rival's mill to explode, then offer to buy the ruins. It was coldly efficient. By the 1850s, the family controlled roughly 70% of America's gunpowder production. The Civil War made them staggering sums. Both sides needed ammunition. The Union bought from DuPont directly. The Confederacy bought through intermediaries. The family didn't particularly care about politics. They cared about market dominance. When the smoke cleared in 1865, DuPont had government contracts locked down for decades. That monopoly created something unusual. Most industrial fortunes in that era were vulnerable. Rockefeller had oil, Carnegie had steel, but competitors could theoretically enter those markets. Gunpowder was different. The barriers were insane. You needed chemistry expertise, expensive equipment, water power, and a willingness to risk dying in an explosion every single day. Plus, DuPont had sewn up the supply chains. They controlled sulfur sources, charcoal suppliers, and distribution networks. Breaking in was nearly impossible. The family structure amplified everything. DuPonts married other DuPonts, keeping wealth concentrated. Cousins married cousins, brothers married sisters-in-law after their brothers died. It sounds bizarre now, but it was strategic. No outside families could claim stakes. Every generation kept control tighter. The company remained private. No shareholders, no public accountability, just family meetings where decisions got made behind closed doors. They built a company town around the Brandywine mills. Workers lived in DuPont housing, shopped at DuPont stores, sent kids to DuPont schools. It created loyalty, but also dependence. If you crossed the family, you lost everything. That control extended into politics. Delaware's senators often had DuPont backing. Governors consulted them on policy. The line between company and state blurred. By 1900, the monopoly was undeniable. Teddy Roosevelt's trust busters started circling. In 1907, the government filed an antitrust suit. The case dragged on for 5 years. Evidence was overwhelming. DuPont controlled 90% of military powder and 70% of commercial explosives. The court ordered a breakup. Most companies would have collapsed. DuPont barely flinched. They spun off 2 competitors, Hercules and Atlas, but kept the crown jewels. More importantly, they'd already seen the future. Explosives were profitable but limited. Chemicals were infinite. The same chemistry that made gunpowder could make dyes, plastics, synthetic fibers, anything. World War I changed everything permanently. European chemical producers were enemies or allies who couldn't export. American industry desperately needed chemical supplies. DuPont pivoted hard. They started producing dyes previously imported from Germany. They developed new explosives for trench warfare. They built massive plants practically overnight. Profits went vertical. By 1918, they weren't just a powder company anymore. They were a chemical empire. And that's when things got really interesting. Because the family realized something crucial. War might end, but people would always need what came after. Fabrics, paints, plastics, materials that didn't explode but instead built the modern world. The question was whether they could dominate chemicals the way they dominated gunpowder. Spoiler: they absolutely could. But the methods they used, the risks they took, and the consequences that followed would make the powder monopoly look quaint by comparison. The 1920s became DuPont's laboratory for total market control. They didn't just make products. They invented needs people didn't know existed yet. Cellophane arrived in 1924. Before that, nobody cared about seeing their food through packaging. DuPont made it essential. They convinced manufacturers that visible products sold better. Within 5 years, cellophane was everywhere. Bread, candy, cigarettes. The company collected royalties on every square foot produced. Then came nylon in 1938. This wasn't incremental improvement, it was replacement. Silk had dominated stockings for centuries. DuPont created a synthetic alternative, launched it at the World's Fair, and watched women line up for blocks. On the first day of sales, 4 million pairs sold. Silk producers never recovered. Japan's economy, heavily dependent on silk exports, took a catastrophic hit. One American company had effectively destroyed an entire international industry through chemistry. The family's wealth structure evolved into something almost untouchable. They didn't keep money in obvious places, trusts within trusts, foundations that funded foundations, holding companies layered so deep that tracking ownership required forensic accountants. When estate taxes came, they barely noticed. The really valuable assets weren't in anyone's name. They were institutional. Winterthur became the showpiece. Henry Francis DuPont spent decades building a museum that was really a monument, 175 rooms filled with American antiques. Gardens that required 30 full-time staff. Tours by appointment only. The message was clear. This family didn't just have wealth, they had taste, legacy, permanence. But the 1930s brought new complications. The Depression hammered most fortunes. DuPont's diversification saved them. People stopped buying cars but still needed paint. Construction slowed, but farmers needed pesticides. The chemical portfolio cushioned everything. They actually grew during economic collapse, which made them targets. Labor movements intensified. Workers at DuPont plants started organizing seriously. The family's response was calculated. They didn't break unions with violence like some industrialists. They simply made the math impossible. Benefits packages that undercut union promises, company housing better than what unions could negotiate. Profit-sharing plans that made strikes financially stupid. Workers still organized, but momentum died when the alternative looked worse. World War II delivered another windfall that would have embarrassed anyone with shame. Manhattan Project contracts came through DuPont. They built the reactors at Hanford that produced plutonium for the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. The government paid cost plus a fixed fee. DuPont publicly claimed they didn't profit from the contract, taking only $1 in fees. Technically true, practically meaningless. The real payoff was intellectual property. Every process, every technique, every chemical innovation from the project, DuPont kept the commercial rights. Nuclear work led to plastics breakthroughs, polymer advances, material sciences that dominated post-war markets. Teflon, Dacron, Mylar, Lycra, each one a DuPont trademark, each one a revenue stream that lasted decades. They weren't selling products anymore, they were selling the building blocks of modern life. You couldn't avoid DuPont even if you tried. Your clothes contained their fibers. Your kitchen used their coatings. Your car had their paint. Market saturation doesn't begin to describe it. The 50s and 60s brought the Better Living Through Chemistry campaign, brilliant marketing that positioned chemicals as progress itself. Any criticism looked like you opposed advancement. Environmental concerns, you must hate innovation. Worker safety complaints, you're anti-science. They'd weaponized optimism, then the cracks started showing. Ketone poisoning in Virginia. Workers at a DuPont contractor developed tremors, liver damage, neurological problems. The company's response was pure calculation. Settle quickly, admit nothing, move production, rinse and repeat. Teflon production contaminated water supplies around Parkersburg. Studies showed health effects. DuPont's scientists knew. Internal documents proved it. They kept producing anyway because stopping meant admitting liability. The legal strategy was elegant. Delay everything, bury plaintiffs in paperwork, settle individual cases before class actions could form. When regulation came, lobby for grandfather clauses. The EPA might restrict new chemicals, but existing products? Those stayed on the market indefinitely. The family had learned something crucial from gunpowder days. Control the definitions. If you write the safety standards, you decide what's safe. By the 2000s, the company had fragmented, but the wealth remained concentrated. Corteva for agriculture, Chemours for chemicals. DuPont kept the name but shed the liability-heavy divisions. Brilliant restructuring that protected assets while isolating legal exposure. Lawsuits targeted subsidiaries with limited resources. The real money stayed protected in family trusts and diversified holdings. Today's DuPont family members live quietly. No flashy social media, no reality shows. They learned from Rockefellers and Vanderbilts. Visibility invites scrutiny. Better to operate through foundations, sit on nonprofit boards, influence policy from comfortable distances. Their names appear on university buildings and museum wings. Respectable philanthropy that obscures how the money was actually made. The fortune's exact size is unknowable by design. Forbes estimates mean nothing when wealth is this diffused. But consider the infrastructure. The patents still generating royalties. The real estate holdings across generations. The investment portfolios managed by firms that don't advertise. Conservative estimates put it north of 20 billion spread across descendants, probably higher. What's fascinating isn't the number, it's the durability. Most industrial fortunes peaked and faded. DuPont's keeps compounding because they learned the ultimate lesson early. Don't make one thing, make everything. Don't control one market, control the inputs to every market. Gunpowder taught them that monopolies draw attention. Chemicals taught them that ubiquity provides invisibility. They built an empire on things that explode and things that don't. The explosions made headlines, the plastics made fortunes, and somewhere in Delaware, in houses most people will never see, the descendants of a French immigrant count money made from both. The formula still works. Find what people need, control how it's made, and never apologize for the consequences. The DuPont story isn't really about gunpowder or chemicals, it's about understanding that control beats innovation every single time. They didn't invent explosives. They just made them better and then made sure nobody else could compete. They didn't discover nylon by accident. They engineered market dominance before the product even existed. What separates the DuPonts from forgotten industrialists isn't luck or timing. It's recognizing that real wealth comes from owning the invisible infrastructure of daily life. You don't need customers to love you if they can't function without you. That's the lesson from Brandywine to Teflon to whatever chemical compound they're profiting from right now. 2 centuries later, the formula still works. Make yourself essential, stay quiet about it, and let time do the compounding. The explosions were just the beginning.